Hello, today I'm going to show you how to paint sunshine by this lovely Cornish river. I always start by painting the sunny side of the street first, and you can get the tones. In this case, it's the old barn wall. Just lose the edge a little bit. The next focal point is the concrete quay, which I'm putting in homemade grey. Very, very diluted homemade grey. This also has to look warm. I will put the colours I'm using in the description. So I'm adding a little bit of Naples yellow to it, which will find its own edge with a chemical reaction. Anything with yellow in acts as like an opposite magnet and sends things away. So instantly looking sunny now. A little bit more Naples yellow. Just send it around there. There's a shadow from something else there. I think it's a hedge or something. And the concrete actually goes past the flowers. So just drop a little bit more Naples yellow in there and it will find its own weight. You don't always want a firm edge, you want lost and found edges. And because this is going to have shadow on top but I want it to match, I'm just going to fill the page. Now because this is nice and warm and interesting shapes, it leads you into the picture. Now, the cottages are in the shade and they're a long way away, but you can still see the orange roof line. So I've got a number 1 brush and I've just mixed some Venetian red with cadmium orange, just putting in the roof line, and the same on its neighbour. Now they've got slate roofs, so I'm going to use the homemade grey again with a little bit more French ultramarine, and then drop in some Payne's grey for the very dark areas. So I've got those all prepared. Using a number 2 brush because it is a long way away and I want to be in control. So I'll go up to the orange roof line. It doesn't matter if it bleeds into it slightly. So that's a suggestion of the roof. Now I can add, because it's in shadow, some dark areas. So I've just got some Payne's grey on the brush, letting it drip down from the top. Then I'll get some of the grey with the French ultramarine in and just bring that down. Just feather it back a little bit. Now this one's much lighter, so I'll go in just with the homemade grey. You can always tint these afterwards if you need to, but you need to make a start. And then just a little bit of the blue. And again, that's got some highlight on, so I'll just use the brush, just feather the paper. That'll just find its own way. So now I come back to the barn with the homemade grey and a little brush. I just look for anything that's interesting. Put the interesting things in first. You don't need to do every stone, you just need to make it the suggestion of them. And they're quite grey towards the bottom. Just carry on like that and you'll find it'll look a reasonable stone building. Just mix and match each colour. And I'm leaving some room for the white daisies that are growing there. I'm going to keep these paints to finish off, but I want to do the water next. So I'll turn the palette round so I've still got mixing space. Before I put the water in, I need to just put the riverside edge in. As the tide's dropping, there's some muddy bank showing, and the top of the grass. The grass is quite bright, so I'm using sap green mixed with lemon yellow, and then I can tint it with yellow ochre if I need to. Just put a line in. There's a car there, but I'm not going to put that in because I don't need the reflection. And I'm now adding some yellow ochre, because the grass isn't all one shade. It's not a lawn, it is riverbank. Using a number 4 brush for this. And it is a ragged edge, it's not anything neat and tidy. Going round the boat supports a little bit. Then it disappears. If I've gone over the boat supports, I can always take them out with a stiffer brush. Now I'm going to start halfway down this time. Just put a bit more in. You can do this when it's still wet. I can't do any more because there'll be reflections of the cottages and hedges going in. So the next step is to do some more work on the cottages. This particular one's got a hedge and bushes going all the way up to the first floor windows. So I'm going to take the number 4 brush again and a little bit of green and just gently mark out the bushes first. I've got about 3 bushes here, so I'll just gently put them in, and then I can make them darker when I've found them. And a hedge all the way along. So that's claimed the space. So now I need to make a very dark green, so I'm going to use the indigo again, drop it into the green, then some chrome yellow, a little bit more indigo. This is because they're in the shade. Just test it and see what I think. That seems fine. So I will now start with the hedge, which is very dark at the bottom. Then add a little bit of brown just to warm it up a bit. The bushes are quite yellowy, so I'll just mix a slight variation, then it does not all going to look the same. Just make a wiggly edge. Then changes to a different green, so I'll just make a slight line there. Dried the brush off, and under this middle window there's a hole in the hedge for you to walk through, which is the sort of thing we all like to see. But it starts much lower down. The greenery does go behind the cottage with sunshine and shadow, so I've got just some yellow, and I'm going to add a sunny lawn. So that's all dealt with. I can now do the water because it's had a chance to dry. Now the shades up the top won't necessarily be the same as the water, so you've got to look for light and dark. Now first of all, we've got a mooring buoy which somebody's put on a stick, which is a very good idea. It's always a long way down to reach them. And that's got the reflection of the cottage all the way, apart from a little bit where this bush is reflecting. So we start with putting the bush in very gently, nothing too serious, and that comes to about the top of the pole. So just pop it in. And then there's another dark area between the two cottages. So having found them, I now go in with much darker paint. But because it's reflected, it's a different shade. It's slightly warmer because it's nearer us. And then I'll get some earth colours, yellow ochre, and just put some lines in across. And there's a lot of the white house showing here, so I won't put so much paint in. Lip it up to the bank. And then some blue of the water. Whatever colour the sky is, there will be some blue showing, or grey. So I can put a line in. Then I'll make up a very weak blue and just put the ripples in where the white house is. Doesn't have to be completely white, but just lighter than the rest. And it's very dark in the middle again. Go round the mooring buoy. Merge the colours in. And then in the middle here it's very, very dark, so I'm going to add some more indigo because we need to show the difference. A little bit more blue. Because it's still in line with the white house. And then there's a line of blue to the boat from the mooring buoy because it's causing a change of direction. So I'll slip that in and the colours will find their own way. And then we've got some orange because of the chimney. I won't make it too orangey because it's quite dark. That's just there. And the rest of it is really just ordinary green, so I'm going to mix chrome yellow with the indigo again. Just put in sideways lines, just catching the tooth of the paper. Back to the boat. I can always add a second colour. So I've got the tooth of the paper showing. And it's very, very dark right up to the top of this boat, the gunwale. And then some green going round the boat, but not too much. And that's coming out to a point. So having filled the space, I'll put the points in. And the same in the middle. And on the edge of the building. They are at an angle, so I've got that right. I've got a hard line here, where the angle of the water reflection is changing with the superstructure of the boat. So because I've already got some white paper showing, I can go over again, just put a little bit more emphasis on it. Whilst that's drying, I can move forward to the steps, which I've got some plants. I'll leave space for plants and some floating matter. So I'm just putting in very strong French ultramarine, which goes to the top of the boat. So I'm looking for little places that I can slip it in. And there's a shadow here which I'll leave blank. It's still wet, so I can just go back and slip some paint in green. Using a quite dry brush here, just to make the suggestion of them, and then I can highlight them later. And then there was something floating which I wasn't too sure what it was. We'll make it grey because it's a good foil. Always get things floating on the water. And then there's a very deep reflection which I'm going to use Payne's grey because I want to separate it from the indigo in the green. I'll just go down the side of the boat and the side of the quay. And we can't really tell what colour the boat is all over because it's so dark. So I'm going to use a dark brown for the wooden trim, which is catching the sunlight in certain places. So I'll just put in a brown trim and then I can highlight it. Go a second time just with the Payne's grey in the middle bit. So this is two sides of a piece of wood here. And there's a rubber bumper on the front, which is always a good idea. And an oar in the middle. So we can add the oar. I'm adding it first because the middle of the boat is blue. Whilst this is all drying, I'm going to put the hull of the two boats in. One's light blue inside, and I'm not sure what the outside is because it's so much shadow, and this one's navy blue. For this one, I've mixed French ultramarine and indigo, and it's nice the way that you can see parts of the hull around the jagged stones. I'm just putting it in the way that it's made, doing the lines sideways round the fender. It's another one with a nose fender. I've just put in the water line. It does look quite big, but the tide's going out, so these boats are touching the bottom, and a slight sun blast on the other side. Now this particular boat here has got a lot of shadow, so I've mixed up a blue that's quite dark, which is French ultramarine tinted with a bit of Indian red. I'm just going to go round the shadows. I don't want it to be exactly the same colour as the water. I want it to be a bit darker. And I had the Indian red out from doing the waterline on that one. When the shadow comes down, that's why I put the ore in first. And then down to the footwell, which is even darker. Now the outside of the boat is in so much shadow you can't identify the colour, so I'm going to mix up Payne's grey and a little bit of the indigo mix and just put a very dark hull in. Sometimes in the shadows the colours are completely lost. Go around the key very carefully. And then work my way back. And it's got a little bit more curve on the front. I would like to have used a bigger brush, but I'm in a tight corner, so I'm safer with a smaller one. Now that I've put the hull in, I can deepen the shadow in the water that I put in earlier. Sometimes it's just safest to claim space and then go back later. Now while that's drying, I can move on to the plants that are on the barn. So I'm going to use nice yellowy green and work out into the water with this plant here, which is growing over the building as well. Just make it nice and curly. And then I've got white daisies here. So I'm going to use a different brush, very, very thin paint, thin as I can get, and go round them. So they're just visible. I hope the camera's picking this up. Doesn't matter whether I put in more or less daisies, it's just that that's what attracted me to the corner, was the lovely blue reflection and the flowers. So let the paint down again, don't want it getting too strong. Come back over here, put some more in. And in fact they go nearly all the way up. So I've got some more here which I can put dark edge round. And a wavy line. This is a sort of cellar under the barn, which we get to shortly. And then lots of green foliage, which I'll just stick in very lightly for now, just to claim the space. and some more green, I'm not sure what it is, but it's happy there down the bottom. So now I need to just make the foliage a bit stronger now I've got the spaces, and just make random shapes really the way it grows. Always paint things the way they grow, so it's going obviously from the ground up. And this is bits of the green that I've used earlier to give the picture harmony. Going with a little bit darker paint. Some of it's in its own shadow. And it's not a solid cover there, it's all different areas. And drop some very dark in here just to show that it's in its own shadow. That's given me a semblance of that. Now this hole here in the building sort of might have been a storage aperture or something. That's very, very dark, so I'm going to use Payne's grey. I could make it darker later on. And it's very dark right up to the daisies, so where I had the other colour, I'll just go on top, drawing round them with the dark. If you have the lightest lights and the darkest darks together in a picture, it really punctuates it. So that makes a good aperture for now, and there's a grey concrete lintel on top of it. Well, it looks concrete anyway. So stick that in. Just doing it very gently. So I want the focal point to be the water. So these other things mustn't be dominant. And then the bricks are a certain width, so I've got to decide which brush is best. I think the number 4 is good. And then same the other side. And that's okay that the colours are bleeding into each other, because I'm going to go over the dark again. And then there's a second concrete lintel there. So your eye's still taken to the middle because of the very bright blue and the dark boat. To continue the reflections, I need to put in the front of this cottage. This one's white, this one's grey. I've just put in a base coat of Naples yellow and homemade grey, and I'm just now going to go over it slightly darker, the same colour, because it's made of stone. Just put a few dapples and dots in just to break up the surface, which I'm doing with all the grey colours from my palette. Because it's so far away, it doesn't have to be too detailed. Then I can add the reflections, which come to about here. So I'll start off with a slightly warmer colour as it's reflected, and just pick out a little bit for the windows with the brush. And the roof's really not reflecting because it's at an angle, but I'll put a slight suggestion of it. And then it's all green, so I'll mix up the chrome yellow and indigo again. It's not quite so dark. I'll just put that in. Then the rest is lost because of the reflection of the boat. And in front of the boat there are some more reflections, but they're sort of slightly more choppy. And then the boat itself has got slightly shaded windows where there's a cover on it, there's no natural light going through, so I'm going in with a very small brush to be precise, and I'm mixing up a very dark colour of Indigo and Payne's grey, and just going to do the top. This one's got a cover on, so it's a job to tell if it's straight or not, but I'll put it in as straight. And then I'll just get the same brush, slight variation, just fill in the gaps. I've just gently put in the cottage windows with a dark colour. You don't have to be so definite as they're so far away. And found a couple of items that were red, so it's the rope that's attaching this boat and a couple of things on the other boat. So while I'm in the red mood, I'm going to put the drain pipe in of this barn, which I'm going to do in Venetian red. It's just tinted a little bit. Just using a number 4 brush and pulling it down. And it goes into the plants. And it's got a little spout. Because it is circular, one part of it is catching the sun more than another. So I'm going to just put a red line down the left-hand side of it. I've now turned the palette round again, and I'm going to continue with the yellow ochre and homemade grey for the rest of the barn, just to get the tones set for the sunny corner. Just putting a base layer of yellow ochre in, then I'm going to drop some other colours in. I've got the homemade grey now, having put the yellow ochre over it, and I've just number 4 brush, and I'm just going to just put a few wavy lines in to suggest the edge of stones, because I want you to look into the picture and not get distracted. So it's just a hint of the barn, and then some clear water on the brush. Just gently feather the marks out. Going back in with more grey, just dropping it in at random. There are some shadows from the drain pipe which I can put in later. It's all the way down, and if you just use the water you can remove any pattern but leave a suggestion of a change in stone. Now I've got a rail on the front of the boat here which I don't think I can manage to leave out. So what I'm going to do is to go over it, and then I'm going to put it in with a different coloured paint. It gives a better effect. So there's a white reflection to there. Then there's a little bit of the navy blue hull, and then the rest is green. So I'll put that in, and I'll go back to do the others in a moment. Well, they're very, very dark green, so back to the indigo. Round the jagged stones. I can put a little bit more in here as well. What I can do here is put in some indigo just to make it a little bit darker green. So I've got the tooth of the paper showing. Number 4 brush, just using the side of it. Just trying to catch the tooth of the paper that I left earlier. Just feather it out so there's lost and found edges. And it's very dark above the mooring buoy. I've got to put a white line in there, so I'll make that a bit darker. I've gone round with some bolder colours like some Indian yellow and just highlighted some of the stones and the odd shadow, and I've used white gouache to do the very thin pole on the mooring buoy and the pulpit on the boat. I could have put latex on before I started, but in this occasion I didn't. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and that you'll try and paint some sunshine yourself.